Ryan.
Hello, Rachel.
How you doing?
Oh, I'm feeling very good, Rachel.
You're feeling yum yum?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yum Yum is very appropriate for the type of episode we're talking about today. I'm very glad we named our podcast after that moment for a discussion like what we're going to be doing today.
From the iconic moment in Star Trek Discovery's Season 2 finale. Such Sweet Sorrow Part 2.
There was such sweet sorrow that we had to put it in 2 parts. That's how much such sweet sorrow there was, Rachel.
Yes. So that is where the name Yum Yum comes from. Commander Nandi in that episode, giving us that beautiful, iconic line that we have been in the wake of ever since.
Yeah, it was super effective. It was 100% contagious and 100% fatal, that line, and I've never been able to get past it. Yeah. We named ourselves after it, so should we get tattoos of it? If we did, would you want it to be like matching couple tattoos where I have Yum and you have Yum and then we join our wrists together and it says Yum Yum?
No, because I'm Yum Yum without you.
That's a fair point.
But we've brought in even more Yum Yum for this episode. We are joined by Alan and Magellan from the Chats podcast.
Hello, guys.
Hi. Hi. Hold on, one more take. Hey. Hello.
Hello. Alan and I actually have a couple's tattoo.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And it says 3, 2, 1, cheese friends.
What'd you say?
Cheese spreads?
Cheese spread. That's right. I have spreads.
Oh, spreads. Yes, of course. An amazing
Yeah, we're just
dish.
big fans of charcuterie, but we didn't know how to spell it, so.
Can I get charcuterie in a French accent, Madge?
Charcuterie. Is that good?
Oh, shit.
Wow.
That's really good.
I tried.
Wow, bravo, you did it. So you guys are back here. We've had you on the podcast before, but for those who didn't all tune in and listen to the Death Walker discussion, could you tell us all who you guys are, what your show is, all of that good stuff?
Sure. Well, first of all, we're big fans of episodes of B5 that involve death. As you can tell, there's Deathwalker and this one. But yeah, we're from Chats, a television podcast. We are a TV podcast where we watch cult classic TV shows, usually 2 episodes a week. And a few years ago, we covered Babylon 5. So that's why we're here. That's how Ryan knows us. We love revisiting episodes of B5. Currently, we are we are trying to alienate as many people as possible by watching canceled shows from like the 90s and aughts, such as Drive. You ever heard of it? It was 6 episodes long. Nathan Fillion was in it.
Really?
You ever heard of New Amsterdam? No, not that one. The one that you had.
No, the other one.
We're gonna watch that one next.
The Sexy Doctor show? Yeah? That in New Amsterdam?
No.
Other one.
No.
There's another one?
He is sexy.
Oh,
He's sexy. I think he's a doctor or something.
Does it take place in the city of Amsterdam? And it's
City of New Amsterdam.
Oh, there's
So
a
New
New
York.
Amsterdam. What happened to the old one?
Yeah.
Well, you have to watch the show to find out.
There you go. That's the mystery box at the center of New Amsterdam.
Yeah. Also, he's like a mortal or something, whatever.
Whatever. He's a vampire or something. Yeah, sure. So you guys are podcasting pros. You've done Babylon 5 before. Well, when I say podcasting pros, I mean, there's obviously limitations to that. You've never had Rachel on as a guest. So you're lacking that power. Everybody knows that if you add the Rachel to your show, you're an instant success. That's just a fact, Rachel. That is a fact.
Rachel, this is an open invitation to come on alone because you're Yum Yum all by yourself.
Sounds like Rachel.
Figure out a specific time to do
You're gonna join them for New Amsterdam to find out what happened to Old Amsterdam or whatever show in the future.
Oh, as long as I don't have to watch Drive.
Nobody has to watch Drive. I did. So people, you could listen to my guest appearance on their show to talk about the 2 first episodes of the smash hit success
But
Drive.
right now, we are here to discuss Babylon 5.
In a spoiler capacity, we've watched the show. We've all watched this show from front to back. and we're here to give our views on episodes in that capacity. So that does mean if you have not seen the show before and you're at all worried that we're going to delve into things that you don't want to hear, well, we are. So ye have been warned.
Did you really think that you could keep this a secret?
No.
Well, then why didn't you say something? This plague is spreading through your people like wildfire.
It is not something we talk about.
So who has the DVD description for this episode, and which one are we watching?
Well, Ryan, of course it's me. And, you know, I've rehearsed this reading a couple times, so I'm about to knock it out of the park. This is Season 2, Episode 18, Confessions and Lamentations. You ready? The disease, Dropha. The mortality rate, 100%. While Franklin seeks a cure, Delenn risks her well-being among the race most threatened by the illness. Other station residents make that race a scapegoat.
Wow. So,
Sorry,
everybody... Oh, that was a little ghost chuckle
Stop
there.
it. Stop. Go take a lap and come back.
Get that goat out of here.
Get out of here. You come back when you're ready. So, history and relationship with this one. Of course, people, this is the plague episode of Babylon 5, so I think people, you got to know where we're going to go in this discussion. So if that makes you feel uncomfortable, well, you've got the time to leave now, but we're going to go there most likely, most definitely. So my history is, I watched this episode and I thought it was fine when I first saw it, because I have seen so many of these type of, oh no, there's an illness on the ship, and they vary in degrees of seriousness. They can be silly and they can be deathly serious like this one. And it was a thing that I've seen before, except for the fact that it's so miserable. That was a little different. I do remember being absolutely knocked on my ass when it ended with a whole species dying, and I just sat there going, oh, well... I'll just go back to the TNG days where they just have silly virus episodes like, oh no, this virus is making us into monkeys, and just have a good chuckle instead of thinking about the horrors of death and illness and the failings of the system and of people. So my impression of it first off was, like, it was good. I thought it was a good episode. Didn't blow my socks off, but it also depressed me very much so. What about you, Rachel? You walked into this one. Season 2 has shown itself at this point to be far different, like in a different category to Season 1. Things were getting very serious at this point, and then this one comes along to say, hey, things aren't going to get any less serious. What did you think of it?
I also thought that it was fine. I really enjoyed the thematic message of the episode of, like, we never fucking learn from these things. We never fucking learn. And that's made it next level depressing in my memory. And that rang true on this rewatch.
Oh, yeah. This rewatch was something I was very excited to do, knowing we were going to do it on the podcast, and this is the first time I've rewatched it since the current events going on in the world. So I knew it was going to age in a very specific sort of way, and I didn't realize how well it has aged in many regards. But let's pass it over to the chatsies. Chats boys, chats team, chatslings. Tell us, what has been your experience with Confessions and Lamentations?
Oh boy. So I'll start because I just listened to our coverage of this episode from back in February of 2019 in preparation for this. And it's funny because the first thing I did was I rewatched the episode and I was like, wow, what a heartbreaking, beautiful, like, story. And then I listened to us pre-pandemic, so innocent and young and simple, in an episode where we discussed 2 episodes of Babylon 5 in less than an hour, which is so bananas, because we now episodes, if we hit 90 minutes, we're like, we did it. We're perfect podcasters. And to be under an hour on 2 is stunning. And also we just, like, I don't know. That was a season where we were, like, rejiggering our tone a little bit. And I really don't think that we gave it enough credit for how, like, potent this episode is. And I guess on your first watch, that's what's going to happen, is you're like, oh, I guess Babylon 5 is occasionally really dark. And, like, but shouldn't you know by now? Is what I thought. Because now on the rewatch, I was like, holy crap, this is potent. This is relevant to the 90s, to today, like, and the systemic issues are like the failing as they are so often in Babylon 5 and in our real life. Really, really loved it and was like glad to revisit it, honestly.
I remember one of your big issues that you had when you were first time covering it, and it was one of the few times I've heard people have this when first watching it, especially in season 2, and this was a hang up with episodes like this is, when does the show get hopeful is the thing that I remember you guys would ask a lot. And you watch an episode like this and then that question just is underlined and question marked. It's like, when does the show get hopeful? And it's like, and you watch this episode and you're like, it's still hopeful, but also it's also pessimistic at the same time. Like, it has that juggling act between having someone hopeful like Delenn, someone in the middle like Sheridan who's like, I hope things can be as optimistic, and then Franklin being like, nah, nothing changes, bro. But Magellan, what about you? Did you do the homework and re-listen to your old thoughts to remember what you thought about this episode all those years ago?
Well, studies have shown that giving students homework is not necessarily the best educational. No, I didn't listen to our coverage of it, but that sounds like, how we were talking about this show at that point that we were covering it. And I can totally understand why pre-pandemic we, I think maybe thought that the plot of this episode, there are characters who are making like irrational choices, or it's like, come on, this wouldn't happen that way. But, at this point, we've all experienced the devastation of Chalmers syndrome. And so, which is the third, when Franklin is listing diseases, he says the Black Death, AIDS, and Chalmers syndrome. And that's the fake one that hasn't happened in history yet.
Yeah, it's the usual Star Trek rule of name 2 real things and one fake thing. Yeah.
And one fake thing. But I was glad to revisit this with the perspective that we've developed. And also, honestly, with the perspective of, we covered Angels in America last year and thought a lot about the AIDS crisis in the context of COVID as well. And I'm revisiting this episode thinking about how, like, this is an AIDS episode too, right? And that was something that I don't think I appreciated at the time that we watched it. But, you got to give it up to JMS and the B5 team for continually making episodes of television that are like about these sort of macro political issues that are always grounded in the incentive systems or the biases or the rationalities and irrationalities of human beings involved in those things, to help to make sense of why things play out the way that they do. So I'm happy to find this episode much more memorable and impactful now that I have sort of gained greater perspective to be able to see that and meet it where it is,
Yeah, it's very interesting, but we also get the flip side of things. Like, they explore those macro level things, but they do dive into how they've impacted individuals. And we see a really great example of that with Kefir.
Oh, everybody's favorite boy, Kefir. This is a very serious episode, so they have to bring in a very serious character. Did you remember Kefir? Did you remember?
I was so glad that all we saw of Kefir was him getting chewed out by Ivanova, and then he's gone. Like that was the ideal.
No, he's not gone.
The ideal Kefir scene.
He brings back the plague ship. So Kefir's.
I wasn't even paying
here's the thing: they didn't listen to Kefir. He had a bad feeling about this. He said it. He warned everybody. And did anyone listen to Kefir? No.
There's a couple moments, one of them involving Kefir, and I laughed about these in our original discussion, and I still think that they're kind of goofy, where the line of when the doctor says it's 100% lethal and 100% contagious, and you're like, yeah, I know, okay, that's dramatic. But the other one is when Kefir's like, how many people are there? And the computer is like, there are 200 not life signs. What is the wording?
Life forms.
Life forms. And he's like, you didn't say life signs. Are they all? Does that mean they're all dead? Is that 200 dead bodies? And he's like, yep. Yes. Dead bodies. Yeah. So there's that moment too where it's like, you should have # listened to Kefir.
Ain't the one that Babylon control? Babylon Control. Go ahead, Zeta 1.
We're bringing the transport in for inspection. Recommend full medical team. And you better let the captain know. I got an ugly feeling about this.
When revisiting this one, there's so much to go through here. I was expecting it to be a lot more depressing, and it is very depressing, but one of the things that I found comforting, and we've been noticing this a lot with Babylon 5 on our rewatch with JMS episodes, is the balancing of lightness and darkness, sweetness and bitterness, love and death. And I would love to kick off first with the Delenn and Sheridan stuff, because in amongst all the tragedy, there is life continues on, development of characters continue to happen, relationships form, understandings grow. It's often easy to look at this episode and go, oh, it's a really sad plague episode where bigots attack aliens and everybody's afraid and a whole species dies and nobody learns anything. But I was really drawn to the Sheridan and Delenn stuff here because it's very ballsy to have an episode that is as serious as this, still have humor,
but it's also very JMS.
It's still very JMS.
Like that balance and that switching between something dark and something light is something that JMS loves to do across all of his work, but especially in Babylon 5.
He has that mantra where if you're going to have something really serious, please follow it up with something light and funny, because for God's sake, you don't want to depress everybody to tears. And Babylon 5 is a very depressing show, but I appreciate that here with Sheridan and Delenn. Upon my rewatch, I've been wanting to really be more on board for Delenn than I have been, and I'm really getting it in the back half of season 2, and I thought she was fantastic in this episode. I thought Mira Furlan did a marvelous job. The chemistry between her and Bruce Boxleitner is off the charts here. I love on a rewatch too, even though I hate where they go with it, looking at Linnea being a little incel here, and I'm like, oh yes, I see. I see you, Linnea. I don't like where you go, but I do see it upon a rewatch. Your little frustrations and speak and smack about Sheridan in Minbari when he leaves the room, which was a nice touch. Rachel, you're the fan of romance here, especially. What was your kind of angle on this when first watching it? Because you were very much like, they better get together at some point, and then the episode that's like, we may put them together is the one where everybody dies.
Yeah, it was just like, what crumb are they going to give me for this romance? Because I was already heavily invested at this point.
And the crumb was, call me John.
Yeah, that was it. Like, first name basis and hold my hand. That's it. And I was like, yes.
Yeah, it's very cute. I love they're calling back to previous episodes with their relationship, with them having a human-style dinner earlier in the show, and now we're having a Minbari-style dinner in which there has to be lots of rituals and lots of pontification and all of this stuff, and it's played up for a mixture of comedy but also sincerity. And I say sincerity because Mira Furlan at least plays it like it isn't funny. She plays it like this is genuinely how these people are. I don't get that kind of like, Bruce, he's playing it up for laughs. I mean, he doesn't snore, Sheridan, just fact, he doesn't snore. But I actually enjoyed kicking off with the dinner thing. I thought it was very amusing. It's a very JMS type jokes there, and a lot of kind of physical comedy being played, the expressions on their faces, the timing of silence in there. I thought it was an absolute delight. Alan, what was it like for you to see this side of it, revisiting it? Because I think when I told you guys we're going to do this one, you immediately was like, oh, that's the one where that entire species dies? So that's kind of like at the forefront. But what was it like to come back around to this? Because this is a pivotal part of the show, forming a relationship between two of the main characters that will obviously continue on till the very end of the show.
I don't know if I mentioned this in any previous Yum Yums, but one of the great things that Babylon 5 does, it rewards you on a rewatch a lot better than other shows do, because things like that And honestly, the way that I think the romance stuff fits in this episode is it sets you up for a like delicate episode about like feelings and being nice with people and like and understanding other cultures. And then at the same time, they use that to reel you in and then say, well, at the same, like this thing can happen in the same day of their lives as a plague genocide, ostensibly, which is like really powerful. But at the same time, like you said, Ryan, it like is teeing up a lot of things that are going to build on the future. And I thought that was all really exciting to watch again. Like, oh yeah. And like, you know, Franklin's like Stim's situation in this episode, I was like, oh, that they're setting it up so early. I didn't even notice the first time.
Yeah. And they've been setting it up already in the show with him and his Stims addiction, but this is the first time we physically see him take them, and you kind of note down, it's the, okay. If you're a keen-eyed viewer, I mean, there are some people who still don't know until season 3 happened where Garibaldi says, hey, you got an addiction, bro. And then the audience is like, what? Magellan, what about you? I mean, what did you think of the Sheridan Delenn side of this? Because it is quite a sweet thing in amongst all of the tragedy.
Sheridan is like not my favorite character from Babylon 5. I don't find him super interesting, but I think what interests me most about him is when he's with Delenn. And so I really enjoyed seeing this. This is honestly the part of the episode I remembered better. That I didn't know it was in this episode, but it's like the plot that I was more firmly in my mind than the Drafa plot. And I agree with what you were saying, Ryan, that like the dinner scene is the extent of the comedy of it is like, this is a little awkward and like you guys aren't telling me the rules ahead of time, so I keep almost shoveling this food in my face. And I thought that was really sweet. And I liked Mira Furlan. She's giving us such a wide range across this episode. In that scene, she's like kind of amused by Sheridan not knowing when it's appropriate for him to do certain things. And then just like, I think what's really powerful about this one is demonstrating the difference between sort of like being, I don't know, the difference between the sort of typical media representation of like, ooh, I like this girl, oh, things are moving along, we had our first dinner, and like true, deep human intimacy necessitated by just the like tragedy of life and like the ways in which we need other people. And so to see the moment where Delenn calls him John for the first time in such a moment of despair, I think to me felt like so real and like the most honest way that these two characters could have possibly had their first moment of like genuine intimacy with one another, given just their stations and their sense of purpose in the world. So yeah, that moment to me and the way it's lit when she, is leaning against his chest and she says, John, and that's all she can say. It's so powerful and true and good.
Mira Furlan lets out this absolutely heartbreaking,
just the agony on her face.
Yeah, and the kind of,
she doesn't have the energy to cry, but she has that emotional
release.
Yeah, and that build up and the way that she's just left gasping. And it's just like her trying to grapple with it. But I think I read it also as like Delenn, as sad as she is for all that's been lost, she's glad that she has something to cling to.
Yeah, and she says that in the next sequence when we see her, right, where she gives out the moral that she's determined from this episode. And we see that then furthered with Sheridan being like, I'm willing to see that, but there's some sides. And then we get Franklin's moral at the end of the episode, but he learned from this. And it's just this faith manages for, and how that's tested. I adore the absolute attention to detail with character, where we know all the characters, as does the creator of the show, so well that they can do things in a script that you think wouldn't be applied, but once it's presented, it makes sense. Like, if I was writing this episode, I would not have thought to have Delenn go, hey, can I go into the isolation zone? And when you see that presented, you go, of course she would want to do that. Of course she would want to do that because that's her character. This makes sense for her to do. And then she proceeds to explain it in ways that moves you and makes you wish that you had the capacity for selflessness and compassion the way that she does. And I absolutely adore how Sheridan is a good man, but again, they're all wanting to do the same thing, which is help everybody, but they all have their different roles and their different ideologies and perspectives. And his reaction is, I don't want you to die. I don't want you to get into this. And there's that amazing exchange back and forth where he's like trying to justify it in all these normal ways that these characters do. And he says, they're not your own people, Delenn.
Minbaria taught that at such a time, the afflicted should be ministered to, comforted.
They're not your own people, Delenn.
I didn't know that similarity was required for the exercise of compassion. They are afraid. We wish to do what little we can.
Even our good guy characters have that kind of thing within them that holds them back from being completely selfless and compassionate towards others. And it's not
you see that flicker with Garibaldi when he's like,
haven't helped that mark
do I
out.
help this guy up or not? Yeah.
Just that, and it's a very quick expression on Jerry Doyle's face. It doesn't last too long, but you can tell he's thinking about it. It's like, do I do this? And then he's like, yeah, I do. Because that's who I am. It's my job. It's what I'm here to do. And it's great. It endears you to the characters because they've set them up so well that they can just play out now. And you don't have any doubts that the writer doesn't know who these characters are like you may have in season 1, where it's like they're figuring them out, like Franklin's opposition to Garibaldi, Garibaldi's opposition to Franklin, but they're all wanting to do the right thing, but it makes sense that they're coming at it from all these different angles.
Yeah, Delenn's clarity of purpose in that conversation with Sheridan is so powerful, and like that I think is one of my favorite things about her as a character, and my favorite things about their relationship, which is that just by her example, she calls Sheridan to be a better person, and to like see that moment take place between the two of them, I think is really cool, because he starts the conversation. She's like, I have a request. And he's like, I can't let you leave. She's like, no, man, I'm going in there. Like, you don't know who I am. I'm getting into this and helping people because that's what I do. And it's like, fuck yeah, Delenn, you're awesome. I want to be just like you when I grow up.
Yeah. It's a show that makes you want to, it helps you. That's a great thing about some of these sci-fi shows, just to nail them down. They have these characters that are aspirational. You kind of wish that you could be Delenn, but then also Babylon 5 is really good at kind of going, nah, you don't also want to be. Like, Delenn's also responsible for war, by the way.
I wouldn't...
like, she's got dirt on her too.
I wouldn't want to be Delenn, but I could stand to be a bit more like Delenn.
That's it. Because I think sometimes, especially when you compare it to other shows, there is this idealization of the characters to a degree that it kind of can also separate you. It's like, sure, I'd love to be Jean-Luc Picard, but I don't think anyone can. Because he's like a character that's written to be so heroic that it's kind of hard to really connect in some ways. But then in this, it's like, I know Franklin to be a good man. He has many things that I would want to be, but also in this episode, I'm like, he's just a guy that's going through some shit right now. Alan, is there anything else you want to touch upon with the Delenn and Sheridan stuff before we move on?
Not really. The date scene is really funny, and it's still like holds true. I haven't been on a date like this where it's like you're navigating the other person's culture, but you were saying earlier, like one of the weird things about rewatching is remembering that Lennier is like harboring a deep love for Delenn that like extends beyond just respect. And I really wanted to believe, like, benefit of the doubt watching this for the first time, that like it wasn't that. But now knowing that, the comedy of like, I made a meal, and if you do it the wrong way, then Lennier has to not eat for like 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah,
and that's because he's a miserable simp. Is much funnier, actually. It's funnier because I know.
What's wrong?
As there are rituals to follow in preparing a meal of this nature, there are other rituals we must observe in eating the meal. Otherwise, the food is no longer sanctified, and Lanier must begin all over again.
Well, we certainly wouldn't want that, would we?
How do we...
Let's get depressing!
Let's get very, very depressing. It's the plague, everybody. It's the plague plot. It's the sad plot that... Okay, if I'm going to have two complaints we're watching this from our modern perspective and blah, 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 and this show can't be perfect because it was from the 90s, and what we've learned, two things that I really noted down that I'm like, this didn't happen, but it did happen in real life. Decisions get made really quickly in this episode, which is something I've learned does not happen in our real world. In fact, a lot of the decisions made during COVID took a little longer than you would expect. And two, this episode, it could have, but it didn't. But it's one of the things I've really learned is it didn't politicize the plague as much as you would expect it to with how things have gone now. Like, those are the two things that leapt to mind of what did this episode not touch upon that I did see in the real world that kind of makes me go, oh. And those are the two things of people made decisions really quickly, which is like, I wish that happened a little bit more often with the management of COVID and
referring to this vaccine stroll out.
Oh, and anything. Masks, lockdowns, all of this. Numerous things we could point to. And then no one made a political agenda about it as much. They made it more religious based, and the ambassador does make it the Markhab ambassador does make it political for a moment and then just leaves.
But then it's like the constraints of the show.
That's what I mean.
It's not a political position for Sheridan to be in charge.
No. But I'm just saying, like, obviously, I'm not wanting that necessarily out of this episode. I'm just pointing at if we're going to jump to some things, because I know some people will go, oh, they're not wearing masks. It's like they explain that in the episode.
Yeah.
And certain things of that nature. But that's just what I wanted to leap to first. But, I mean, Magellan, it's been a couple of years since you actually sat down and watched this. What did you think about the whole Draffa plague stuff?
Yeah, I think what I really responded to in terms of how it's depicted is that scene where Franklin is talking to, what's his name? Lazarin?
Yeah, Lazarin. Our actor spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
And Lazarin is making his confession, and Franklin is lamenting. And Lazarin's talking about the sort of like historical context in their society of this particular disease and the ways that it's been moralized and conflated with like, oh, if you have it, must mean that you're a bad person or something like that. And I think that's something that I didn't really even think about when we first watched it. But again, connecting this not only to COVID, but to AIDS, which is like the most immediate context in which this episode was written. That is like sort of the fundamental texture of the AIDS crisis and how it was discussed, which is that there's all this like morality tied up in, or like conversations of morality. And I'm putting big air quotes around that.
Yeah. And then social ostracizing of the people who have it,
right,
and the people who could have it, and
right,
even doctors who refuse to go in and help because they're scared.
Because we see that moment really struck me when Franklin is like, okay, we got to go into the isolation chamber and do some work. And the entire med team hesitates. It's like, fuck, man. Yeah. That happened with AIDS. There were stories of that happening with COVID. And so just like the way that this episode depicts those sort of like human irrationalities, or the ways that we jump to like pathologize disease as opposed to like try to treat it and be, objective and charitable about it, and contrasting that with Delenn and Lanier saying like, well, the thing that we do in times like this is we go to the people who need us the most, and we are there for them. So I think I was nodding my head vigorously a lot in this episode, like, yep, that's how people do this sort of stuff.
Yeah,
and it's really, really upsetting.
One of the things that leapt out at me too is how the angle of it too is people were embarrassed and unwilling to admit that they have it, so then they spread it, and then there's people who believe that they're immune because they're morally pure, or they don't believe in the science, any of that, and that was something that really jumped out at me as well, of just looking at it going, oh, that's an angle that I never really honed in on other watches. Like, I knew it existed, but it was never something that hit me in any way like it does when I watch it today, in which in the modern day, it's just like, that's how it is for a lot of people out there, unfortunately. And it's just one of those things where I raise my eyebrows at B5 going, could you not be accurate like this anymore?
But part of the reason why it feels so accurate is because it goes to the humanity.
Yeah.
And how the human nature responds to issues like this. And it's just like, well, those things are being repeated over and over again, which they point out in the episode, which allows us to explore those ideas with what we know and what we've experienced.
Yeah, and the conflicts that emerge from people being people. There's that sequence of events in which Franklin, being the medical man he's like, okay, solution is simple. We gather all the Marcab up and test them and do all of these things and go through the motions of this. And then Garibaldi raises, well, that's just going to raise alarm bells and this, and they're going to throw a fit at it because you are saying to them in their views that they are immoral and filthy and dirty. And in the eyes of it, it's like, oh, you think in a narrative and you would hope in a real world situation like this, it's like, oh yeah, science can just easily win like this, and there wouldn't be none of those complications or wrinkles to it at all. And then you see in this episode, and we've seen in real life, those complications and wrinkles do exist. It isn't just as simple as Franklin going, get everybody in here, and we're going to give them all tests, and we're going to get the vaccine and cure and get it all in time. You're going to have people like the Marcabs involved who are personally offended because of their belief system, and then you're going to have the Drazi and the human racists who are afraid of them and their salute. You know, it's a whole cavalcade of things like that. Alan, I mean, how did you feel about this? What were the things that leapt out to you about all of this upon your rewatch?
God, it's tough. Because I like I said earlier, I loved it and I found it really moving, like the way that Delenn chose to self-sacrifice and the way that the crew of Babylon 5 tried to handle it. I've always gravitated towards Franklin. I think his response is the most interesting and nuanced. There is a moment that really sells all of this for me when, at the end, Ivanova is like talking to him about the cure, and he's like, yeah, it's kind of silly that they're like, it's the red and green cells, and if we can inject them with those, then they'll be cured.
Yeah, yellow and green cells because they're aliens.
Yellow and green. Not purple and green, unfortunately, not like the Drazi.
No.
And he goes, yeah, but we don't know. And she's like, why don't you know? Didn't you test it? And he looks over and sees where the place where the doctor would have been if he hadn't died. And he's like, we weren't able to. We ran out of time. Like, we don't always get, this is like, it was a common narrative around like early COVID, like when the vaccines were coming out, was like, how are you supposed to know if this thing worked if so many people had died and we just found out about it? And it's like, well, they probably had like some idea of this illness, but Franklin's team is not out here like researching medicine. They literally like concocted a cure off the cuff in a couple of hours or days or whatever, how long this episode takes place. And like, just the pain that he feels. I was like absolutely most into his storyline and his scenes here. Richard Franklin just bringing a like pathos, like a real medical doctor's pathos here.
Yeah.
And it's all sold to me by that final line, which is so JMS, that, Franklin is sitting at the bar in the Zocalo, and the bartender is like, well, it's fine. Like, he's making like a pithy joke about all of the Marcab dying. And Franklin just goes, nothing changes.
And then leaves. And then leaves. Yeah.
And leaves. And like, you know, you watch that when you don't have a lot of like heartbreak and tragedy in your life, and you go like, all right, that's like boomer talk, you know, like we're so cynical about the world, but things are fine. And like now I watch that and I'm like, fuck, you know what? Like, like sometimes it's just like you have to accept that, and it's not the bleakest ending. And you know, I don't think that's the last scene.
That is the last scene. That's how the episode
that's the last scene?
fucking ends, because it goes from Delenn being optimistic about how we have compassion and empathy and we can learn, and then it cuts to that, and that's how it ends. And I'm going to argue with you, Alan. I think that's one of the most bleak endings to any Babylon 5 episode I've ever fucking seen in my life, because I relate to that scene so much, especially being in Melbourne, where we went through the most amount of lockdowns, the longest period of lockdowns in the entire fucking world. And it's just one of those things where it's like, oh, I've been Franklin countless times a week during that. I was just like, oh, fuck me, Dad, this is miserable. I love that scene. I want to talk about that scene in a moment, but to come back to you, Alan, you were going to say some more stuff?
Yeah, well, I think putting those two things together is the showrunners trying to be like, there is optimism, but we also have to be realistic. And it's important on a show like Babylon 5 to not just show our cast as like they live above the rest of the people on the station. Like, we still go to the bar and we still talk to the quote unquote average person, and the average person is still cynical as hell, and they're like, well, good, I guess. And you know, I think it's really important to remind you, like, no matter how much we build a policy based on optimism and like hopefulness, there are average people out there who are still just like, no, doesn't work for me. Doesn't change anything for my life. Too bad.
So you're saying the Babylon Project failed?
It failed.
In its mission to find that?
I think that the season 2 theme song is not as good as the later ones, because then they get into the like, it failed and that part's awesome.
But it works because season 1's theme song was so great, where it was genuinely optimistic and you had Sinclair.
And I love the way that those things are paired, because for me it made me think of the fact that like Delenn is pointing out that we have this potential, and Franklin's response and experience shows that humanity isn't there yet.
Nothing changes. A whole species died and people making jokes and spreading conspiracy theories already, and you're like, yes. I mean, to talk about that scene, I mean, that's a whole can of worms. Majan, you were going to say something?
Well, I just think what's really the sort of question to walk away with from the episode is like, we live in a world that deadens itself to things like this, and the bartender making that joke or people having those responses, it's a way to cope with and distance themselves from tragedy. And I think what we see in this episode is characters who like dare to care very deeply about something that on some level they know is doomed. Like, Franklin goes into this after talking to Lazarin, knowing that his species knew about this disease for centuries and like didn't do anything about it. And so Franklin is making the choice to like try to cure it at the 11th hour. And on some level, he probably knows that that's a doomed mission.
And that's his character flaw. That's his character flaw. He thinks he can fix everything.
He won't stand by.
But also he does, but also he like does it, right? Like he does make a workable cure. It's just that he needed more people who were willing to like care to the extent that he does. And so I think the question is like, when you live in a world like this, do you have the strength to do that when you know that like you can't single-handedly change it, and the best victory you can hope for is a Pyrrhic victory? Like, is it worth doing what Franklin does or what Delenn does, knowing that like you're not going to be able to save the world single-handedly? You're going to submit yourself to like really deep despair.
What is the cost of compassion?
Yeah, and Franklin has that. It's a major part of his character flaw is he does take it extremely personally. Like, he is the guy who's going to fix this. He's the guy that's going to come in and cure everybody. He's in charge of this. He's the rational person. We see that as a major flaw in his character time and time again, that he thinks he can fix it all.
Oh, I don't think he's being particularly rational overall.
No, but and then in the end, the guy who comes up with the idea is the dying doctor who's like, maybe it's these cells, and then he dies, and then Franklin goes on to prove that, and then go on to do more. And see, it's not just Franklin came up with it on his own because he's a super genius wonder boy. In fact, if anything, this episode kind of shows you that Franklin needs support more than anything else rather than self-reliance. Right. And that final scene at the bar when we in Melbourne were at lockdown 6, I want to say, Rachel.
Yeah.
I remember being like, I really feel like Franklin at that bar. Just him just sitting there going, nothing changes. It's all the same shit.
Oh, and that was our response each time the lockdown was
But I remember really feeling it lockdown 6 or 7 here. And it was just, oh, geez. And I had not rewatched the scene. I just remembered the scene. Rewatching it for the first time in a while today, I was really struck upon how fucking wild it is to real life, because I remembered the joke and I remembered him saying nothing changes. What I didn't remember was the guy then proceeding to be like, I don't like the news, it creeps me out, and then going on to be like, I think it's the Vorlons who did it, you know, those freaks. And I'm like, oh, I've seen that a lot too, where people like, I don't want to listen to the news about the current crisis going on, and then I'll spread my own theories about it as if it's factual and based on fear. And I've seen that a lot. And I've reacted to like Franklin, in which it's just like, nothing changes. People suck. I'm over it. That was what really hit me in that final scene, revisiting it. And I mean, one of the most challenging things revisiting episodes like this, when you're looking at it through the context we are, is obviously, I mean, there was always intentions of how it was supposed to hit you, but like this obviously was not necessarily one of them. I don't know. It's just hard to break it down.
This context didn't exist when this episode was produced and released.
Well, yeah, it had AIDS and HIV, which had its own things.
Our context of our current pandemic. But also, I feel like JMS is smart enough to know, as many people did, that another pandemic was inevitable.
I mean, that is just how it works. But I think it's just more so noticing human nature, because this type of human nature existed back when this show was made. And it existed when the bubonic plague happened.
These patterns happen over and over again, which is really at the heart of the episode. And that's why I keep on going back to
Dr.
it.
Lazarin even makes comment about that when Franklin breaks down how the Black Death happened and how we killed the cats, even though they were going to help us kill the rats and the fleas and everything like that, because we ascribed some other notion to it and proceeded to go with that, even though it was dead wrong and it was in fact harming us. And here these Markab, who are spacefaring race, they're doing the same thing as well. And it just makes you go, oh, no matter how far flung in the future with tech we get, we can still fall prey to these things. It's very
and the
depressing.
line that Lazarin has is like, isn't that always how it goes? Analyze the problem, choose whichever strategy makes the least sense, and then do it. It's like, damn, dude, you're right.
And since cats were supposed to be the devil's familiars, they were killed by the millions. But cats were the only means of controlling the real source of the plague, the rats and the fleas that went with them. So all they were doing was helping the plague spread even faster.
That does seem to be the rule, doesn't it? Analyze the problem, choose whichever strategy makes least sense, and then do it.
You guys reviewed this, like we said, before the pandemic. We're reviewing it during it. And it is one of those things where there are critiques that could be made that you guys did on your show and we would make before everything happened. And now those critiques don't exist as strongly, if at all, because the world has proven it right. I remember your thing was, why would they bring a ship filled with infected dead people back and spread it around? And I laugh now at that, because here in Australia, Rachel, do you want to kind of go over what we did? That was a fun thing, what we did.
Well,
in the
we
world.
get to, solely blame a state government.
Yes.
It wasn't a federal decision. The New South Wales government decided to allow a cruise ship that they knew had people infected.
The majority of them infected, yeah. A plague ship, yeah.
With coronavirus into the port of Sydney and just set them free onto the city.
And many people died as a result of that. And it's one of those things where you go, wow, something that we could point at as a thing to get the story happening in a script, because that's the critique, right? When you look at it, when you remove this, you go, oh, that's because, the story has to happen. The plague has to get on the ship, and this is how they get on the station.
But the plague is already on the station anyway.
Yeah, but we have to accelerate it so that it gets everywhere. And that's how you do that in your script. It's a shortcut, and you could critique it, but now the real world has shown us that we are just as bad and failing as the B5 people are, and it just makes me like the show more because it's like, oh yeah, we do suck sometimes.
And in slight, adding context, they don't realize that that's what it is until after the ship has been docked, because it's when Lazarin is there trying to get him, like Sheridan,
not to go in
and to not board it. That is when
things get real.
Get real, and Franklin comes in with the revelation that it's a plague.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you guys think about all that stuff?
Yeah, like you were saying, this is people on a cruise ship being allowed back on. I think that the difference though is like the Marcab are not coming on to like engage in capitalism. Like we're not letting them on B5 for that. There's no person saying like, oh, but they won't be able to do XYZ. It's just that like, what my suggestion I think was in that discussion was, why didn't we send like a medical, because they actually do a TNG episode about this in season 1, right? Where there's like the group of people who are all dying, and then it's the guy, the freaking generic dude who is like gonna get married to Marina Sirtis' character, Deanna Troi.
Okay, yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I guess I'll go because I'll die, but like I can cure them at least. And like that's his holy sort of like quest. And they don't do anything like that. Instead, they do something much more realistic.
Yeah. They do send some medical team into this ship, isn't that right?
Keffa asks for a medical team to be ready, but I think they're part of the group that's being blocked from getting on board. But then we see them processing all of the bodies.
Yes. In one of the few scenes I saw a security guy wearing a mask, actually, so that was fun.
True. But there's also like, once some of them have come on, or once like the doctor has come on the ship, there are people who are like, oh, well, we should probably box them in like a room together, right? And then I forget who says like, yeah, but you can just kill them faster is what that's going to do. Like,
yeah, that was
you're
Franklin,
guaranteeing. Probably. Yeah, you're just going to guarantee that they die instead of like, we isolate them individually and like put them in med bay and try to treat them. And that's why we have to have our heroic doctor Lazarin be like, I guess you have a test subject. Like this plague we only figure out a cure because of people who choose to sacrifice and be empathetic in a way, to see it from someone else's perspective. Because you have Delenn, who's like, these people don't deserve to suffer alone in here. I'm bringing Lenore with me. And you have Dr. Lazarin, who's like, you need somebody to work on. Use my body. And this wouldn't have been fixed if it weren't for people like that.
Yeah, and he knows he's going to die. And Delenn, knows that's a possibility. He knows he's going to be dead.
Yeah, like it's like if he doesn't already have the virus, doing this autopsy will guarantee it.
Yeah. My favorite scene in the episode, honestly, was the board, the conference room scene where we have the entire command staff up there and they're all discussing what to do, what's the next step that we take, and seeing all of the characters we know who are all good people, but with conflicting perspectives on how to solve this. I remember, Magellan, that was a scene that stood out to you. And when you were covering Babylon 5, that was kind of the stuff that you enjoyed a lot of, having characters who are all good people wanting to do the right thing, but they all have different ways of doing the right thing. How did that come across for you when looking at it today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's still interesting to me in that same way. Yeah.
It's one of those things where I love that everybody is, hey, we want to save these people, but Garibaldi's got some good points, which we see play out. The fact that people will attack them and be racist towards them and have a go at them, and it does happen, and so it furthers his viewpoint of maybe we should contain them and protect them from people because people are bad, and that is obviously something as a security guy he's going to have that viewpoint on. And then you have Sheridan trying to mediate and coming up with all of these options like, okay, we are going to quarantine and we are going to spread the information to the general public because it's for the greater good and we need that transparency. And then you have Franklin coming at it with all the scientific things and like, obviously we wouldn't want to put them in their box because it would just spread faster. And all the stress about the unknown variables. That's what I thought was really well done, was in that scene, they're operating on the little knowledge that they do have.
Yeah, the confusion, but also the need for action.
On the other hand, when word gets out that we've got the next best thing to the Black Death roaming the station, it's going to scare everybody. And when people get scared, they start looking for scapegoats. If we can keep the Markhabs all together in one place, my people can protect them. Because trust me, this is going to get real ugly real fast.
No, there are still too many variables, too many unknowns. I need answers, Doctor, and as fast as you can get them to me.
I don't know. We'll ping pong around, but did you, whenever watching this, did you actually have that little hope that Franklin was going to make it in time? Because it builds you up. It's like, he's going to do it. He's running down the hallway. He's got the things. He's ready to go. And then they open the door and you immediately know, no, it's too late. All of their faces, all of those reactions of horror and just everything there. Did you think that the Markhab were going to make it when you watched this?
For the first time, yeah. I was just like, oh, they're not going to kill the kid. They've already killed a kid, but they're not going to kill that kid, right?
It's a littler kid than the previous one that died in this show.
It's a little girl.
It's a little girl whose parents, one of them has died already, but they'll be fine, right? That was a moment, too, of JMS, where you have this beautiful speech from Delenn about her childhood and about how she believes in things and faith and everything's going to work out okay, to then immediately have it that, oh no, the kid's dizzy and has Druffer. And it's just, oh, okay. A moment of sweetness with a moment of bitterness right there. What about you, Magellan? I mean, we've all seen these type of plot lines and episodes of shows before. The virus plot, the disease, plague plot. I know that you guys on your show have talked about that numerous times, that you have these kind of recurring staples of like, oh, we have the bug plot and the virus plot. What did you think? And how do you think about it now in terms of like, did you think that they were going to somehow pull it all together and things were going to work out okay?
I was hoping that would be the case, but I had in my mind the stereotypical end of the disease episode scene where it like cuts to everybody getting injected with the cure or whatever, and they kind of rub their arm. They're like, thanks, man. I feel so much better, or whatever. And like, I had that scene in my mind and I knew that would just be so inauthentic to this episode.
Yeah,
so I really wanted, I thought at least like, I think just like Franklin, I think Franklin's thought going into this is, if I can save at least one person, right? And I think I was expecting, okay, there'll be at least one person or some like sort of glimmer of, well, we couldn't save everybody, but we could do something. And for it to be just, no, there's no one left.
There's no one left.
Yeah.
But potentially the cure can stop it from spreading to the other species.
Like the Pakmara.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like the Pakmara may be protected, but that isn't really acknowledged at all.
Well,
because the devastation is what is drawing our attention.
I think it is kind of drawn upon with Delenn's scene at the end, where it's like, we are going to learn from this. We are going to honor them. We're going to remember this. And that gets bundled up within that, I would assume. Like, that's how I look at it when it comes to, it's like that, he did win in a way. He didn't get to save a whole species, but he is helping contain and like learn and grow.
Cure.
But he doesn't see that. What he sees is the TV and the racist and that nothing ever fucking changes. That's what he sees. That's the great thing about the dynamic of the characters is Delenn's faith is reaffirmed and his is broken more. He's made more cynical. and more depressed by the events taking place here. Alan, what about you? Did you have that naive notion that Babylon 5 was going to somehow allow this not to be such a depressing ending? And is it too much?
Not anymore. In the meantime, since the first time we watched this, besides COVID, Joe and I have also watched the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which you can hear our coverage of over on Trek Chats, a Star Trek podcast. But on that show, if they did an episode like this, and like I was saying earlier, they kind of have in various forms, they would just get what Magellan's talking about, where they're like, phew, that was close. We almost had a genocide. And at least in early Tenchi, I can't speak for the whole series, but it feels like that show prioritizes making Starfleet look like really, really competent, and like you guys would not be saved without Starfleet. Whereas this is like, yeah, the Babylon 5 team can only do so much. Like we are still a crew of like real people with flaws and like imperfect technology. So we can't actually cure a disease like this that quickly. And unfortunately, like sometimes the consequences are serious, which I think is like the point of Babylon 5 in a lot of ways, is pushing back against that Star Trek ideal of like space will make us better, and actually saying, well, even like high-tech future technology won't cure all diseases because of various competing ideologies preventing that.
Yeah, a change of geographical location doesn't solve all of your problems.
And an evolution in technology and social evolution and all that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be perfect. You're not going to become these Zen-like utopian people. And that's proven with, the Vorlons, that's proven with them, in which you would assume via the Trek lore that these are these benevolent, godlike aliens. And in fact, no, they're assholes that people are afraid of, to the point in which they're spreading conspiracy theory rumors about how they probably spread it. And I remember back in the day, I was confronted when watching Babylon 5 because our characters are competent, but they're not elite competent. They're not these magnificent people with this awesome government or structure that they're a part of, where they're part of a dying,
they're not
corrupt...
a bunch of Wesleys.
They're not a bunch of Wesley Crushers. They're not a bunch of Jean-Luc Picards or Rikers or anything like that. They are people who are suffering from personal issues such as addiction or stress or overworking or numerous things, as well as the world around them is very similar to ours, in which it has its good things and it has its bad things, and people are trying to make the best of things, and also people are trying to make the worst of things happen as well. And I found that very confronting, because there's this level of, well, this is for escapism, and I want my escapism to be characters who are better than me in a lot of ways, and that will somehow be smart as a whip and cure everybody, even though at times I criticize those type of things in shows as well as being a little bit too optimistic and false. And when I first watched B5, I found that to be an element that held me back. And then more you watch it, the more endearing I find it. And I find it to be, its strength is that it is sometimes uncomfortably relatable in that fashion.
Well, and I think for me, on some level, there's the desire to see characters who are like larger than life and superhumanly competent or whatever. But there's also the line in this episode that I think expresses what is to be admired about these characters in a way that feels attainable, which is, I think it's Delenn who says this, I don't remember, but there's the line, sometimes the test isn't to find the answer, it's to see how you react when there is no answer.
That was Dr. Lazarin to Franklin.
That was Lazarin,
yeah.
Right. And so that's what B5 is able to give us, is in some ways, like, as bleak as the show is at times, I think the core optimism of it is there are many characters who, in that moment of like crisis or uncertainty or chaos or confusion or whatever, they react to the fact that there is no answer in ways that sometimes let us down and sometimes show us like what we can be capable of if we hold to, certain values or to one another or things like that.
What happens is that we honor the memory of those who are no longer with us by using what we have learned to save others, to exercise faith and patience and charity. to reach out to those who are afraid. If we can do that, then their passing will have had meaning, and we will grow from it.
Maybe. I hope so.
This show really captures perfectly that sensation that one can have, especially in dire crisis like we are in, where you can be like Franklin and just see the worst of everything. But in fact, there is good still happening in the world. Like, there is still good things happening within this episode. This is an episode where a whole species dies, but somehow people find love, people find understanding and connection, and yet also there are people who don't find those things.
Death is a part of life. Tragedy is a part of life. In the tapestry of everybody's experiences, those things happen, and those things happen at the same time.
And I think that's what saves this episode from being too sad and too manipulative on a writer's level to wring the audience out. Because there's this sentiment in certain pieces of media, especially in a lot of modern shows actually, in which the more depressing we can make it, that means we're doing a better job because we are
making you feel something.
We're giving the audience an emotional reaction, the shock reaction of a whole species dying, a shock reaction of, say, suicide or sexual violence, like these type of really depressing things. And I think that's what sets us apart is it does still have these optimistic things and these hopeful things in there as counterpoints to those more unsettling and depressing elements that is here. Rachel, I think it's time for the Spotlight section of the show. I know it's your favorite section of the show, Alan. You're always saying to me, I love Spotlight, the Michael Keaton film Spotlight, but also the Spotlight section on Yum Yum podcast, isn't that right?
They're one and the same to me. You know, basically Michael Keaton was in this segment.
Yeah, if Michael Keaton was in Babylon 5, who would he play? It's a big question to ask. Is it Garibaldi?
He would be one of the... No, if he was a main character, yeah, he'd be Garibaldi. Or he'd be Lou
Welch. Lou Welch. That's a good
Well,
pick.
we didn't ask who would say Yum Yum in this episode.
Oh, that's a big question. Who would have said Yum Yum in this episode if it was...
I have this.
Yeah? Who was it?
If it was written by the writers of Star Trek Discovery, the best show ever made.
Yeah.
Sheridan after he finally gets to eat.
Yep.
that is the correct answer.
Yeah.
That is the correct answer. You got it. You got it in one.
That flarn in him.
Enough flan, yum yum. But let's get real. Spotlight is the part of the show in which we put a spotlight on an actor or an actress that appeared in this episode. We go over their performance, their role in the show, what we know them from, any interesting pieces of trivia that we've picked up along the way. We are looking at Jim Norton, who played Dr. Lazarin, the Marcab doctor in this episode, who has, in fact, appeared in Babylon 5 before and will appear once more. And I think that is the big point to bring up straight off the bat is... he was one of those guys when I first watched it, I recognized him even though he was in all the alien makeup. I'm like, oh, you're the Ombuds guy. You're the Ombuds from Grail and Quality of Mercy. You're back and now you're an alien. And I wonder what happened to the Ombuds, but they brought you here to come and be this guy. And I had a smile on my face. I do enjoy that very much in TV shows when they give actors other roles in it because it just shows that they like them enough that they want to give them something else to do.
He has that a couple of times with different like long-running TV shows.
Yeah.
Where it's just like they have him back again as a completely different character.
Yeah, or they have him
just
as
several years apart or whatever.
Or as the same character but recurring minorly. In TNG, he's in a few episodes that are pretty far apart from one another as the same character. So we'll get to that. But Alan, what did you think of Jim Norton here? What did you think of him as Lazarin? And do you remember his other B5 appearances by any chance?
I do. I remember the Ombuds character. And who was the other one that he does?
He was the Narn that was in Jakar's mind telling him to basically go on his character arc when Jakar had a lot of dust. And that was basically Kosh using a Narn image to speak to him.
Yeah, Jim Norton has like been small roles in big films, I would say, for a while, which I find funny. He has a super bit role in Harry Potter, the Chamber of Secrets that I remember, where he gets a cup of pudding on his head.
Yeah.
That's pretty hilarious. I believe he's one of the main villains in Straw Dogs, which is a horror thriller that I've always been really curious about.
Which had David Warner, who was in the same episode of Babylon 5 Grail with him.
And Peter Vaughn, who is in Game of Thrones as Master Aemon. I'm just saying, your favorite show, Ryan, Game of Thrones.
I don't mind Game of Thrones. I don't hate Game of Thrones. I hate some of it, but that's fine.
Yeah, that's valid.
No,
but he in general. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say, like, he's one of those character actor mans who does appear in some well-known things, but you may not remember him, except for Straw Dogs. He is pretty prevalent in Straw Dogs, and so I do remember him in that. But go on.
But he's got a good old-fashioned British old man vibe, and the first thing I wrote in my notes was like, well, I know he's Irish.
Yes, thank you.
But the first thing I wrote was like, all right, got to keep an eye out for Jim Norton, and then like he's in the first scene, and I was like, is that? And I looked it up and I was like, wow, that was him in like so much makeup that you couldn't begin to recognize him. But there's a part where I think he's like putting on gloves or something when he's like going into the med bay. And I was like, putting on gloves while you're in costume must be hard. And assuming that you have like something, part of the costuming on your hands. But it was kind of funny that like that little moment. And I think overall he brings really good gravitas to this episode.
Yeah. What about you, Magellan?
I thought he did a great job.
He did a good job. Do you remember him from those other B5 things? One of them was your favorite episode.
Jaquan. I remember Jaquan. I do, actually.
You don't remember Ombuds from Grail? Your favorite episode, Grail, with Jinxo?
I only know Grail now because you post the thumbs up gif every 30 seconds in our Discord.
That's from TKO, baby. Sorry, wrong episode. Get the fuck out of here.
I always get those
fuck out of here.
I'm quitting.
He's out of here. Sorry, Alan dropped out. Alan had to leave because of sheer embarrassment. Mixing up Grail and TKO. What a grave mistake that is. Grail has Jinxo, while TKO has Walker Smith. Thank you.
Same character.
No, one. Well, no, very different characters.
Slight difference.
Yeah, there are slight differences between the actors too. You do remember him from the other episode, though, Magellan, right? Which was one of your favorite B5 episodes.
Yeah, when you said my favorite episode, I didn't think you were making a big gag. I thought you were talking about the fact that that is one of my favorite episodes. And I remember his performance there, and it was awesome as well.
I know you sometimes have talked about on the podcast having that difficulty of having an attachment to a one-off character in an episode, like a special one-off character. Like in this, we meet this guy for the first time, we see him and he dies. And I personally have an attachment to him by the end of the episode. I'm like, oh, what a sad thing. How is that for you when it comes to this?
And I also believe that he has a long-standing relationship with Franklin.
Yes.
I buy that completely.
Their rapport, and he has been briefly mentioned in lines of dialogue before, but what do you think about that, Magellan? Because I know that's been a subject that you've touched upon even on this podcast, of like getting attached to a character that it solely exists in a single episode. And like this is, we see him and we see him die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think in this episode, I think sometimes it bothers me in a way that I think a show is doing something wrong, in the sense that like I would have liked to see them explore a particular character more. And I think sometimes shows like, wrap people up or write them out because of just the logistics of we have to keep paying this person, or our audience is going to remember week to week who this person is or whatever. But sometimes I think like in this episode, this character has a complete arc. Lazarin, like I feel like he does everything that Lazarin needs to do narratively, and has a sort of like moment of not only taking accountability for the problems of his society, but like rising above those problems and trying to do something to address what's going on. And I agree with Rachel that his relationship with Franklin feels very authentic and lived in a way that like B5 doesn't always hit that super well. When a character pops on the station, they're like, hey, remember me?
It's me, Walker Smith, your favorite character, your best friend, Michael.
Right. Yeah.
Watch your back.
Hey, everyone ever remember me, Malcolm? I'm your ex.
And now I'm a racist. Yeah, and I wear an ugly sweater, and I'm like the only Australian on the show ever. Great, thank you, Malcolm Biggs. Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like maybe the end for Lazarin isn't as satisfying as Becoming and telling us that he'll see us in a million years or whatever. Just kidding. It's much better than that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Like at the end of this, I wasn't like, dang, I wish I had seen more of that guy, because I feel like the fact that I connected with him and now he's dead is so essential to what the episode is trying to communicate.
I love this performance. I think it's one of my top performances, guest spot performances in season 2.
Absolutely.
There are some actors, obviously the script helps, direction helps, but I've seen him in many things, comedies, dramas, big and small roles. He's that actor, and it's a special breed because not every actor can do this, not even some of the big ones. He makes you believe that this is a real person. Even though he's in this alien makeup and all of that stuff, he has this real lived-in quality. He believes in the character he's playing, and he embodies a good man. And that is very, very hard to do, because what is that? What do you do as an actor to embody a good person? And Lazarin's a good man. He sacrifices himself. Obviously, it's in the script too, but the way he delivers lines and the pauses and the amount of expression he can get in his face, considering the Markab design on purpose has a very blank looking face. They blur out and smooth over a lot of areas that help communicate expression. But this guy can manage to do that. And I found him captivating. I found him to the level in which there's another version of this show in which he's a character that could be in it more. Heck, you could have a version, hey, Reboot, JMS, I know you're listening. You could have him as you could have him as the Doctor on Babylon 5, because he's just so honed in, and that comes down to his performance. I find him captivating, electric. He just walks in with this dignity to the role, and he did that with the Ombuds as well, where it's a small role in a goofy episode and a good episode, but you believe that he's this judge who's having to deal with all these silly aliens. And then when they bring him back again for Dust to Dust as the voice of Kosh through a Narn persona, yeah, you get Jim Norton to deliver this speech that helps Jakar go in a spiritual awakening, because he can fucking do it. It's just a special thing that some actors can really grab and just ring out for the audience to enjoy. And I love it. I thought he was masterful and absolutely a pleasure to watch. What about you, Rachel?
Yeah, he's amazing. He's amazing. And it feels like it's a fully realized character. I buy their relationship and its history, the way that they work together, the way that they talk to each other, like Lazarin and Franklin.
Yeah.
It feels really true, and it feels really solid.
The chemistry between those two is really great. And Richard Biggs as an actor was one of the cast members on B5 who 9 times out of 10 had really great chemistry off of the other performers. So that was like a natural talent that he had in him. So that also helps Lazarin as well, in which if our lead guy doesn't have the chemistry with the guest star, it can hurt the suspension of disbelief. Yeah. It can hurt you buying into it, which we've talked about with other performers on this show. Like we mentioned it, Malcolm Biggs. We never believed that those two actors alone, those two characters had any past or chemistry, so we never believed in it. And here, those two, it's a joint performance between the two of them, because it is mainly just the two of them. He rarely, if ever, interacts with other characters or other performers in this episode. It's just Richard Biggs as Franklin.
Yeah.
Have you seen him in anything in particular? Is there anything that leaps out to you as the Jim Norton thing other than him in B5?
I remember him as Einstein in TNG.
Yeah. Did you guys note that down? Did you see that in his IMDb, that in TNG he gets to be Albert Einstein?
I try not to read about TNG ahead of what we watched.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's like season 6 if it helps you any.
Whoa. I'll get to it in a million years.
A million years. But yeah, he is in TNG. He plays the holographic representation of Albert Einstein. And probably, I love in TNG especially and Voyager how they use the holodeck in clever little ways. And that's probably one of my favorite little human ways in which one of the characters, Reg Barkley, who's addicted to holodecks, is trying to figure out a problem to something scientifically, so he bounces his ideas off of really smart people in the holodeck, even though they are just the computer he's talking to, getting the personification of what is intelligence to you to bounce off ideas. So obviously Albert Einstein and Aristotle and all these other people. I think that's always a fun idea in sci-fi shows. I like it because it's something that I think I would do if I was in their situation. And he plays out Albert Einstein in heavy prosthetic makeup, which I wanted to note down. This guy looks old all the time. Like, in this show, he looks like an old man when you see him in other episodes and when you see him look like even here. And yet he's still around today acting and he looks the same. He's just one of those guys that's always looked old. But I always wondered what it was like for this kind of thespian actor to, for some reason in the late 80s to the 90s, he just decided, can I do roles with lots of makeup on him? I just want to be covered in makeup. And I'm just thinking about this little old Irish man getting layers and layers of prosthetics on him. And he's just like, can I do it again in TNG, but as Albert Einstein? It's like, I don't know why he got addicted to that. Is that something you guys would ever want to do? Like, if you were in the acting realm, was that something that you would ever be drawn to?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm always into playing different characters and, looking completely different. I think that's like super fun. Yeah, do it. Why not?
Would you be a Narn?
I would be a Narn. I know that one's like really heavy, but yeah, sure, why not?
Contacts?
I'd be like a super serious Narn.
Contacts?
Yeah, screw it. I've looked into getting colored contacts before because I did a Toph cosplay many years ago, but they're like kind of expensive. That was back when I needed prescription ones. Now I don't need prescription ones, so
that's fair. I remember him for comedy, Jim Norton. It's weird to see him in dramatic roles for me because he's in Father Ted as Bishop Brennan, who's like the funniest recurring antagonist that show ever had. And there's the highest rated episode of Father Ted is literally called Kicking Bishop Brennan up the arse, because that's the premise of the episode is, can we get away with kicking him up the arse because he's such a prick? And it's just so funny to see Brennan, Bishop Len Brennan, in serious roles sometimes, because I just always think of him as a comedy guy, and I look through his career and he's done other comedy things, but realistically he does the usual kind of roles you would expect. He plays judges, police, butlers, people of nobility or people of a certain echelon of power, and doctors, of course, and bishops, as mentioned. He's Irish, so he plays a lot of priests and stuff. So I think of him in Father Ted, in which the whole pitch in one of the last episodes he's ever in is just, can we kick him up the arse and take a picture of ourselves kicking him up the arse? And so that's what I'm gravitating towards. What about you guys? Was there anything that leapt out at you that you're like, oh, he was in this?
Harry Potter was the first one I found that I was like, oh, neat, because I remembered it.
Because everybody's in Harry Potter who's from the UK.
Yes.
Or Ireland.
He's, British character actor. I haven't seen a lot of his horror stuff. I've always been interested in Straw Dogs. I think I watched some of the remake.
Oof, I'm
sorry. And then I was like, this seems bad. Yeah, the remake's not good. And then I stopped and I was like, I'll watch the old one, and then I did not. That's it.
Magellan?
Not really, to be honest.
You never watched The Boy? The horror film from a few
the
years
doll
ago?
child?
Yeah. He's the old man who looks after it and then says, could you look after a doll? And he has the funniest suicide scene I've ever seen in a movie, in which him and the old woman walk out to the sea and throw rocks on their heads. It's really funny. I would recommend The Boy. And I'd recommend The Boy 2, in which that movie somehow exists even though the boy was destroyed in the first movie and it was not an evil little doll but a boy living in the walls. But then the second film's like, no, it's actually an evil doll. Ha ha. You're an idiot.
It's just also, a whole series of films on different takes on scary boys, is what you're saying?
Yes. Different little boy dolls. And the second one's like,
lots of people living in walls.
Lots of boys living in wall movies out there. There's a Gary Busey lives in the wall movie that exists if you ever want to watch that.
He's up there.
Julie.
Planning. Watching. Waiting. Vestron Pictures presents Gary Busey, Mimi Rogers. Hyder in the house. How can they lock him out when he's already inside?
I will point out that Ryan got confused between Nanny and The Nanny.
Oh, please. If you told me this guy was in The Nanny...
When I was skimming the IMDb page, I had the same confusion. I was like, whoa, he was in The Nanny? Oh, never mind.
It only became an issue because Ryan was pressing me because I recently rewatched The Nanny because he was just like, who was he? Who was he? And I was just like, I don't know. I don't remember him.
And it sounds
I don't think he was in it. I don't think he was in it. And he was like, he was in like 10 episodes and he gave me the character name.
And the character name sounds like a name for The Nanny where it's called Michael Twomey.
And then I look at it and I'm like, because I was like scrolling through the 90s, I was like, The Nanny's not here. The Nanny's not here. And I like changed the categories to TV and was scrolling through. And then I was like, fucking hell, Ryan.
What?
You can't even read the title. But also like the images.
I didn't get images. I was looking at the IMDb, like just names. I didn't click on it. I just went, oh, he's in 10 episodes of The Nanny. Rachel, you've seen The Nanny recently. Was he like Niles' friend or something? Or like Mr. Sheffield's enemy? You said, when I gave you this, admit it, you gave me a possibility of who he could be in the show. You're like, I think he's this guy that dated Fran and then dated Cece.
You were like,
oh, really?
He could either be like British and like, you know,
or
he
Irish.
would be old. And I was just like, well, there is that guy. He was also in Frasier and Cheers as different characters.
I mean, if you were a certain type of actor in that period of time, you were most definitely in Cheers or most definitely in Frasier and Star Trek, because Star Trek often has a lot of Cheers actors just show up occasionally because they were worked on the same lot. So it's like, hey, do you want to be in this episode? Yeah, I do. Come on in, Lilith. You can be in this episode of TNG, and you want to fuck Riker for some reason.
Yeah. His latest credit, it was the show, I think it's the show Cheaters.
Yes, I'm actually interested in watching that because it's from the same people who did Misfits, which is a show I like. And they've done other shows I enjoy, and he's in a couple of episodes of that.
His first credit was the face of Fu Manchu in 1965.
Was he the face?
No, no. But Christopher Lee was Fu Manchu.
I don't know who that is, unfortunately. Christopher Lee.
Christopher
Lee. Oh, I can imagine what he looks like already. Christopher Lee as Fu Manchu. It's very appropriate.
Yeah. No yellow face at all.
No.
He was also in Memoirs of an Invisible Man with Chevy Chase.
Oh, that's a great film. Great John Carpenter classic.
He was also in an episode of Midsomer Murders in 2009 called The Glitch.
I would love it if it's revealed he's a hacker. Like Jim Norton's a hacker in Midsomer and he's committing murders through internet crimes. I'd love that. He glitched the mainframe.
There was a role of his that I saw and I was just like, oh my God, yes. Yes, he is perfect for this character. He was in a filmed production of Mice and Men.
Oh, no.
You want to guess what character he was?
No, I don't know.
Magellan Allen?
Magellan Allen.
Wait, I knew this at some point. I don't know anymore.
Allen's gone. Magellan's looking it up. I can hear type.
Oh, Magellan's not in the call anymore?
Magellan's...
No, I'm here.
Oh, he's here.
I'm trying to decide if he was the mice or the men, and I just can't figure it out.
He was Candy, the old man.
Ah.
So he's one of the men. Got it. Okay.
He's
not the one my.
I do want to note down he was in a personal favorite Robert Pattinson movie of mine, Water for Elephants.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And then
I like that movie.
The last little fact that I have about him is like, if I had a nickel for every time, I would have 2 nickels, but it's kind of weird.
4.
He's in 2 different movies that have Hitler in the title.
Oh, was he Hitler?
And no, he was in Even Hitler Had a Girlfriend from 1992.
Should we watch that for the podcast?
And Hitler, my part in his downfall from 1973.
There you go. Yeah, great character actor. He's still at it, still working, still plugging away at it. I'd love to hear more about his involvement in Babylon 5 because he was evidently one of those guys that they kept coming back to and giving him different roles, kind of like Wayne Alexander and Kim Strauss, who was the Markhab ambassador in this episode. And we mainly know Kim Strauss to be the Green Drazi guy. But that is about it for Confessions and Lamentations, a fun-filled episode for the entire family. I give it a yum yum.
Yum yum.
I give it a yum yum.
Yum yum.
I give it a hearty yum yum.
Yum yum.
Mmm.
Oh.
Okay, Majan, you can close whatever tab you're looking at, but could you give us an answer of yum or yum yum? Jesus.
That was my answer. I said, mmm.
That's not an option. It's either yum or yum yum. Ryan has made this very clear.
No, fucking...
Yum, yum.
Yum yum.
That's a sound I didn't know I wanted to hear from Magellan, but we got it. On tape for everybody to repeat that 15-second loop right there. Again,
Please
right, I'll have you know I'm
change-
staring at my desktop wallpaper right now.
Show you. Oh, we don't know what the wallpaper is.
Please let me change that to your Discord notification sound.
Alrighty, what is the next episode of Babylon 5 we'll be looking at?
On an all-new Babylon 5.
Episode 19, Divided Loyalties. Lita Alexander, Patricia Tallman, returns to Babylon 5, convinced there is a traitor on board. Ivanova makes a startling revelation.
Oh, yeah. We remember this
Lita.
episode.
Hey, Lena.
Hey, Lita. Zach is in that episode. He is in that episode wearing his little Nightwatch armband. So next time we'll be talking about Divided Loyalties.
Bye-bye, Talia.
Bye-bye, Talia. It's a momentous episode. It's a biggie. Lita's back.
Yeah.
She's back from the pilot and her pleasure thresholds are gone. She no longer has them. So people make sure to tune in for that. Give that episode a revisit in the interim of time. Also, check out Alan and Magellan. Check out their podcast. Where can people find you?
Hey, folks, we're on Chat's a Television Podcast. It's a TV podcast if you like to talk. It can be found at chatspod.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's CHATZ : a television podcast. And we are going to be wrapping up Drive soon and moving on to New Amsterdam in our season on canceled television shows before moving on to our next big adventure. So check us out over there, please. We appreciate your support.
Thank you very much. And who knows, by the time this episode is out, what show will Chats be covering? Huh? They could be covering Babylon 5 again, or Hypernauts, the great classic with the Gloos, everybody's favorite, introducing the Gloos. We can be found on your usual social media sites, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, all of that. Yum Yum Pod or Yum Yum Podcast. We are always putting stuff on there, engaging with people, furthering conversations, sharing some jokes and some videos and some memes and all of that great stuff. If you are not following us on there, you should. Whatever one, Yum Yum Pod or Yum Yum Podcast. We have an email too, in case you want to email us your questions, queries, thoughts, and concerns. Rachel, what's the email?
yumyumpod@gmail.com.
It's a very creative email. We came up with it all by ourselves. We scratched our heads and thought what we could do. We also have a Patreon in which we have a lot of content on there, as well as a group Discord that you can be a part of if you join the Patreon. Yum Yum Podcast on Patreon. We are going through the X-Men movies. Magellan, I know how much you love the X-Men movies. You're a big fan. Logan. Days of Future Past. Peter Dinklage.
Yeah. Do you like The Last Stand?
Oh, we've done a whole bunch. We're nearing the end of our X-Men coverage. One day we'll watch New Mutants and we'll be the only people who ever did. It's true. It's a fact. But of course we are covering new Star Trek stuff on there. We've gone through Star Trek Picard, going through Strange New Worlds. If you want to hear us, our hot takes, our strenuous thoughts, our pain, our joys, our pleasures on that, Patreon, as well as just everything else. We've got a whole shit ton of content on there, so feel free to join the party. But that is all we've got for you for this episode. A lot of people were here. Alan was here, Magellan was here, I was here, Rachel was here, but Jakar wasn't here. Jakar wasn't here to say the line. He wasn't here to give us a farewell, but I guess we'll have to do it for him. He was a little bit too busy testing pleasure thresholds or eating some fresh spoo, I imagine, but he was not here to say it, but I'll say it for us all. I'll say it to you all. Good eating to you.